The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now on the Talk Station, Faith Matters.
And welcome to the program here today. I'm Ben Ball, and joined today on Faith Matters with Reverend Robert Corrigan, Associate Pastor, Chapel by the Sea in Emerald Isle, and also with Bishop Doc Loomis, Bishop in Residence at All Saints Anglican in Newport. And good day, gentlemen.
Good morning, Ben.
Good morning, Ben.
Doesn't Robert look good today? Doesn't he look sharp in his sweater vest?
I'm not in my sweater vest.
All right. It's radio. You can be wearing whatever you want.
But I do defend the right to bear arms.
Oh, my. I need a rim shot.
Join us again next week.
Tip the waiters to be here all week. All right, let's talk about our first one. Is a monumental decision that could be made this session of the Supreme Court, even with an even number of justices, and that'll probably play into what we have to say about this. And that's because of a Texas clinic law that's before the Supreme Court now. And from Reuters, impact of Texas clinic law at issue in abortion case before Supreme Court. I'll just look at the first part of this. It says lawyers for the state of Texas are making an unusual argument in a closely watched abortion case set to go before the U.S. Supreme Court this week. It was on this Wednesday. A law that placed new restrictions on clinics providing abortions didn't have much of an impact. Law that placed new restrictions on clinics providing abortions didn't have much of an impact. That's the argument that is being made. The Texas abortion law requires clinic physicians to have admitting privileges at a hospital within 30 miles. A separate provision, which has not yet gone into effect, would mandate that abortion clinics must have costly hospital-grade facilities. Now, here's the arguments that are being made. Interesting, the Daily Signal quotes a number of the exchanges that took place here. And then the Daily Signal talks about how the huge crowd of protesters was standing outside. And the case is the Whole Woman's Health versus Helderstedt. The Supreme Court is considering whether Texas HB 2 law, a common-sense reform intended to increase women's health and safety, has the purpose or effect of imposing an undue burden on women seeking abortions. So let's just start with the premise. First of all, we'll get into some of the arguments that are being put forth by the plaintiffs and the defendants and the justices and their questions too. But Robert, first of all, you've worked in in this right to life field for a long time.
Yep.
Is this a key case?
It's a significant case. I believe in North Carolina we've already done this, haven't we? Don't we have statutes that do the same thing, that say that the two main areas...
They're being argued even now. I think.
Yeah, I think they're being... Okay, but the two primary points is that abortion clinics should have the same standard of same medical standards of cleanliness and operation that any kind of clinic that does outpatient surgeries. I mean, that's basically it. Okay, you got to meet this standard. Abortion clinics have to meet the state standard for outpatient clinics. And up until now, they've been exempted from that. And so that's one change. That's what's being argued. The other one is that the doctors, the abortionists who work in the clinics must have privileges at a hospital within 30 miles of that clinic. And the purpose of that is that if there is an incident, something that needs to be taken care of, at the hospital, then you've got all the records, you've got the attending physician, you've got everyone involved in the process, which they are exempt from now. So that if there is a complication in an abortion clinic now, that they can't handle there, they send them to the hospital. But the doctor doesn't necessarily go if he doesn't have privileges there.
Right.
And the medical information from the patient doesn't go as well. So those are the two issues in debate, and it's astounding to me that there would be any consideration. This is the attempt of the state to improve the health conditions for women seeking abortion. It should not be a debate. I mean, that's pretty straightforward.
Looking at some of the exchanges, several of the justices, according to, again, the Daily Signal article, pressed Stephanie Toti, the lawyer representing the abortion doctors and clinics, for evidence showing that the law has had an impact on clinics, causing their closure. Justice Samuel Alito pointed out in a similar case in Louisiana, the challengers included specific data on the number of abortions being performed and the capacity of each clinic. He asked why they didn't have that kind of data. And Alito referred to an article in the Huffington Post that said that one of the clinics the plaintiff claimed closed because of the law had actually closed because of reduction in state funding, which has nothing to do with HB2. When Toti protested that the article wasn't in the record, Alito pointed out, well, she had lots of items in her brief that were not in the record. And in fact, Alito asked, wasn't it true that at least 3 new clinics that meet the health and safety standards had opened since the law had passed? It seems that there's some very common sense approaches that the state of Texas DACA is taking here, but they, as we'll see from some of the liberal justices, they don't really seem to care about that.
No, they don't. Their argument, I love the way this article summarizes the argument at the end, and what the plaintiffs are basically saying is that the right to have an abortion outweighs the right to be cared for in a healthy way. That limiting access to abortion is the greater sin than actually not caring about their health and safety. But I got to tell you, I know you want to talk about the details of this, but it amazes me, having been raised in a post Roe versus Wade world, that this is what we're talking about in America, is that we are nuancing, we're having court battles and compiling evidence about genocide. It absolutely boggles my mind that we've gone to the point now where we're in front of the Supreme Court not arguing whether or not it's right to kill people, but whether or not it's right to kill them in a healthy place or an unhealthy place, to have access and not have access. Look, these kinds of things happen all over the country. These kinds of battles come up state by state. And the basic reason is that there are enough people in most states that say this is just wrong. And if we can't beat it, we're certainly going to limit it. We're certainly going to do the best we can to limit it. Don't make a mistake. That's what Texas has done here. This is an attempt to approach the health issues of women having abortions, but its primary purpose and what's behind it and what's in the mind of these legislators when they go to bed at night is, how do we stop this scourge on our country? It's just sad that this is the kind of legal manipulation we have to do to end something that is so blatantly ungodly. It's hard to believe.
It is.
I think in many ways that legislators around the country are trying to reach for the arguments that will actually make it to a place that can be defined, since the court has already set the parameters. They've already set the basic foundation and approved and affirmed that on too many times now. So now they're saying, well, let's firm up these edges of this law. Let's find out where we stand and where we can't stand, and on the health and safety of the mom just seems to be a common sense place to stand. So it may be indeed, and certainly it is, their motivation about how to end this scourge on it, but they know they're not going to win that argument now. I mean, not now, before a court.
Yeah, not the way the Supreme Court's composed. That's right. Nor the whole court system is kind of biased. But it's when we look at, it's kind of like, to me, it's somewhat like those people that they believe they're doing right and they want to stop the spread of guns in our culture, and they can't directly get rid of the guns. So what do they try to do? They get rid of the ammunition and the magazines and everything else, and that's a tactic. And right. That's what we're seeing here. We're having to resort to these kinds of tactics to limit this, to put a halt on it, and it's been effective. In different states, there are. This all came up out of the Gosnell You remember the Gosnell case?
Yeah, in the Gosnell Clinic.
And
Was it Philadelphia, I think?
Oh yeah, it was in Philadelphia, and it was in, you know, he was in a poor section of town, and it was just a abortion mill. I mean, it was a kill center.
Well, they brought that up, and that was an exception to the rule until one of the justices says, "Well, wait a minute. The argument is here. The plaintiffs or the state is saying that in their brief that this clinic that's actually named here had holes in it, had holes in the floor, didn't have the proper equipment for sterilizing instruments." I mean, those are real things.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's right.
That endanger people.
Yeah.
So again, as we take a look at this story, and it's a little bit surprising to me that it does look like at least it's going to be a split. And Anthony Kennedy, though, wanted to kick the can down the road. The Justice Kennedy kind of said,
"Can we send it back to the lower courts?
Can we do some more fact-finding?"
Yeah, more fact-finding.
And as we reminded folks last week, the lower court have already found in favor of HB2.
That's correct.
So remanding it back to the lower appellate would keep in place the current legislation.
By
they
the
just
way,
wouldn't have to vote on it.
Exactly.
The North Carolina law was to require description of a sonogram, and that was ruled against that by a appeals court that shot that down, and the Supreme Court would not revive that. So that's where that one stands. This is Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240, and we'll have more to come in a moment. Hey, welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240, and thanks for joining us here today. We do appreciate you spending some time with us. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornigan and Bishop Doc Loomis, and I want to talk about the Oscars. The Best Picture win, it went to Spotlight. And the editorial that's in the National Catholic Reporter is, Best Picture win for Spotlight is fitting humiliation for the church. For those who don't know, and most of us haven't seen it, in 2001, the plot line is, in 2001, editor Marty Barron of the Boston Globe assigns a team of journalists to investigate allegations against John Geoghegan, an unfrocked priest accused of molesting more than 80 boys, led by the editor Walter Robbie Robinson. Reporters Michael Resendez and Matt Carroll and Sasha Pfeiffer interview victims and try to unseal sensitive documents. The reporters make it their mission to provide proof of a cover-up of sexual abuse within the Roman Catholic Church. The editorial says that with Spotlight awarded the Oscar for Best Motion Picture, the public humiliation for the Catholic Church is now as thorough as one might expect in a culture where what is on screen is often the most persuasive element in fashioning public opinion. As we just, without going through all of this editorial here, Doc, this is obviously a long documented understanding of what was going on in some churches and some parishes. It's not new, but when it hits the screen, it has a different kind of impact, doesn't it?
It does have a different kind of impact because regardless of what's transpired up until this time, it makes it very real. I mean, it's almost 40 years ago when I was in seminary. I can remember hearing reports from a local Catholic seminary that there was abuse going on, and I thought this is something that's been going on actually for kind of a long time. Yes, I
remember jokes about it. I think even George Carlin would do it back in the 60s.
So, jokes about
about Catholic priests and
choir boys, the altar service. Yeah. It's a very sad situation right now, and I think what this article is making a point that the journalists who stepped in and found out this information were doing a very good thing. I actually agree. I don't have any problem with that. And exposing this, kind of sweeping it under the rug stuff that was going on in the Catholic Church was a very bad thing. And the article calls the Catholic Church to a kind of repentance, actually calling on their sacramental, the sacrament of penance, to apologize to the world, something we really haven't heard the Catholic Church do as a body. We've heard the Pope mention things, we've heard bishops say things, but there really hasn't been a real solid body-wide acknowledgement and
what would that look
repentance.
like?
You know, that's hard to say because penance, the actual sacrament of penance, has changed over the years. When early on, penance was a very public thing. Now it's become kind of a quiet thing. You think about the advent of the confessional. The penance has become something that's happened kind of behind doors, and it's really between me as a believer and the Lord. I think what people are saying is we need people to come out and stand in front of the world, link arms, and say, look, this is what happened. We are sorry. It's never going to happen again. But I want to say this because I've been doing this a long time, and this isn't a Catholic issue. It is a Catholic issue, but it is a church issue. And I mean, I can think when
it's an issue.
Well, it's an issue across the board,
yeah.
but where it should not be an issue in the church, it is an issue, and sometimes even greater than in the secular world. That's just a fact. I served a church in Ohio back in the early '80s, I think it was, and when I showed up at the church, the 3 pastors that had preceded me, 4 pastors, one left with the organist, one left with the choir master, both left their wives, both lost their relationships. And the third one was having an affair while he was in the pulpit of the church. And the fourth one seemed like a pretty reasonable guy. And after I'd been at the church for 3 years, the fourth one was arrested by the U.S. postal employees for purchasing with his wife child pornography. So I want you to think about that. That's 5 pastors in a row, 1, 2, 3 adulteries, a child porn. That's what I got to follow. This is not just a Catholic issue. And this is an issue of a dysfunctional, broken institutional church.
Mm-hmm. The Vatican, writing about this after the award of the movie Spotlight, this is written from Crux, a Catholic magazine. It says, Vatican Radio newspaper praised Spotlight as courageous. The day after the movie Spotlight received the Best Picture Oscar, the Vatican's newspaper and radio stations are praising the film as courageous and not anti-Catholic, and revealed that clerics in Rome have been recommending the film to each other. Although a Vatican spokesman declined comment on the award, he referred journalists to favorable reports on Vatican Radio and the Vatican newspaper. You know, I think that was almost looking like they were going to go this way, but maybe they should maybe they need to require viewing of this. And maybe we should all be looking at this. All of us as pastors and all of us in churches ought to be watching this movie.
It's a great title for a movie, isn't it? Spotlight. in terms of this sin, and because this is the dark sin. These are the dark sins. These are the ones we still as a culture we know, kind of from our code of conscience that this is wrong. That it's a betrayal of trust. Deep betrayal of trust. And really that's the injury that was done in the church that you went into, was for the congregants, parishioners still there, was that sense of betrayal. I mean,
they just got beaten down.
It's just again. Awful. And what it does is completely undermine the validity of that priestly call and high priest call. And it's tragic, from the lay person perspective, to see that kind of thing happen.
It undermines people's view of the authority of Christ. I mean, for heaven's sakes, the Pope, the vicar of Christ. I mean, we represent to people both at the altar as we're celebrating communion and in our word and in our preaching what is to be as Christ-like an appearance as we can possibly provide. And people looked at these pastors that I knew, and they look at pastors that fall like this, and they say, if there was a loving God, this would never have happened.
Yeah.
How would God pick somebody and then have them to do this?
Right.
Well, it's woe to me, man. It's bad enough that I have sinned, but I've committed the ultimate sin in that I have profaned the name of the Lord in front of people.
Yeah.
And that, as far as I can tell from Ezekiel 36, that's the worst thing I can do, is profane the name of the Lord in front of the nations.
Yeah.
When I'm supposed to have as my job to glorify Him. Did I just start preaching? I think I did. I'm sorry.
That was good.
You're allowed.
The next segment.
It's
Sorry.
Sunday morning.
It's collection time.
pass the place.
Now, Reverend Hans Zoller is quoted in this article, member of the Pope's Special Commission on Sexual Abuse and president of the Center for the Protection of Minors at Gregorian University in Rome. He says, it's important to understand that we must change our attitude, which in Italian can be expressed in the famous word omerta. No talking, solving everything by sweeping it under the rug. Hide it and think that everything will pass. He said, we must understand that it will not. We must realize that we either think about this with a lot of courage and the ability to deal with things up front and until the end, or one day, sooner or later, we will be obliged to do so. And this, I think, is one of the central messages of the film. I remember when I was first reading some of the news reports that came out, some of the first times and some of the first reactions to this were about the ministry that was being attempted with some priests. It was the excuse for moving some, was that this is our opportunity to provide ministry to them, to seek their repentance, to do the reconciliation and that could happen in all this. But this was sans civil authorities.
Exactly.
Before there were civil authorities. And you may remember an incident that happened in our area a number of years ago that actually happened as a person that had financial access that was taking money from a church, and initially they said, we didn't want to bring authorities into it. We wanted to deal with it and minister this person who was repentant and wanted to deal with this, and then they found that it was a lot more money.
Yeah. That's
than
right.
they had anticipated. And the civil authorities got involved. Is this an issue, Doc, where the sin obviously became much more than we thought it was at first, or should there have been civil engagement right in the very beginning?
Well, look, the church was now we're talking about Roman Catholics, but again,
Right.
Please understand it happens everywhere. The church was rightly concerned that if it began bringing civil authorities into something that was as widespread and damning as this was,
As they were discovering
right,
it. Yeah.
that it would negatively impact the witness of Christ in the community. So I kind of, on the one hand, there's a piece of my brain that says, yeah, I can understand why you'd want to handle this. I also understand that biblically we're not really supposed to rely on the courts. We're supposed to kind of handle things among ourselves as believers. So I get that part too. But here's where I draw the line. I mean, this is addictive sexual injury. This is sexual battery. This is an abuse of power that really is not something that gets handled in the simple, and please understand I'm saying this nicely, these things don't get cured in the simple act of penance. Mm-hmm. These things take time. They need trained people to work with these priests. And the idea that somebody says, I'm sorry, and we move you from St. Louis to Sacramento, that doesn't do it.
Right.
And that's what the Catholic Church tried to do. We're going to move you, and you promised, so be good, without dealing with the addictive behavior that is the sexual predator's mindset.
Well, instead, wouldn't we also be looking at a dual approach? Is that the child and their civil rights and all those things need to be protected, and all those people, while we also are ministering, and both sides, victims as well as the perpetrator needs ministry.
Yeah, it looked like it was much of the response. We've been talking about the response to the priests that did this, the priests that do this, or the pastors or whomever, right. But the therapy, if you will, for the injured, the victim of this activity was basically a payoff.
Right.
Exactly.
And
that's not enough.
And that's and they're screaming. Their lives have been changed forever by this.
More to come in a moment on Faith Matters on the Talk Station. Welcome back here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball with Bishop Dr. Loomis and Reverend Robert Cornegie. And I want to, coming up in a few weeks is the law that goes into effect unless it gets somehow changed by the legislature. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. But it was a law that will go in effect in Charlotte that will allow for people to use the bathroom of their sexual identity and that is it allows for to prohibit discrimination against the LGBT community, and so it would. And that's been one of the arguments is that what does this mean now that somebody can just use whatever bathroom they wish in a public setting, and it becomes an issue, and it attracted hundreds of people to city council meetings while this was being debated and then voted and approved. The article that happened to see in a website called the Daily Wire was, here's an infuriating example of why those gender identity bathrooms are a terrible idea. It says, imagine being informed that while your young daughter was changing into her swimsuit after school at a local community pool locker room, an adult male lawfully entered said locker room and began undressing. Are you enraged yet? Last Monday in Seattle, this actually happened. Apparently, the man who walked into the women's locker room on 2 occasions and began undressing cited the new state rule that allows people to choose the bathroom based on their gender identity. You know, those laws that the ingenious left, this is a quote here, has been pushing because of inclusiveness. The quote from the reporter from King 5 News, KING 5 News, was, it was a busy time at Evans Pool around 5:30 p.m. Monday, February 8th. The pool was open for lap swim. According to Seattle Parks and Recreation, a man wearing board shorts entered the women's locker room and took off his shirt. Women alerted staff, who told the man to leave, and he said, the law has changed, and I have a right to be here. Nobody called the police, and he went back in a second time. And there is the state park spokesman says they're still working on the issue. He says right now there's no specific protocol on how someone should demonstrate their gender in order to access the bathroom. Employees just rely on verbal identification or physical appearance, and this man offered neither. So, you know, we've already talked about the slippery slope of our morals in this country. Is this? Some people on the LGBT community say it's a silly argument. This doesn't really happen. It's common sense. What people, where they go, but that's not what's codified in the law. So you're raising your eyebrows here, Doc. Is that a sign that you're surprised at that?
Stuff amazes me. I mean, this is so much. This reminds me of the equal rights in marriage stuff that we've been going through for some time. The idea that, but the difference between this particular, what I'll call the bathroom ruling and the marriage ruling is, in marriage, it's two people that agree to come together regardless of their sexual orientation or, now, however,
somebody's not agreeing at all.
This is my daughter's in the pool room being changed, and somebody is now is going to impact my young daughter with his naked body in the room. Stop. So what we need, I guess, what's going to have to come of this is we've got a biological male and female creation. So what we always did was we had a male and female bathroom creation to match. Now that creation is apparently changing, we're going to have to need a third bathroom. So you'll have a men's room and a women's room, and we don't really care what goes on in their room. I mean, I don't see any other way around it. If you're gonna protect people, there's got to be a third bathroom.
Or actually, there's some communities that are working on unisex, trying to have everybody has all stalls and everything else, and so
that's right. You have and there are places like that already. They'll have the he/she on the door, and you go in, and it's one facility, and
that's different.
And you lock the door.
It's multiple,
but it's much different than a swimming pool.
Oh, exactly.
Or a locker room.
Locker room. No, this is huge, and number one, it's codifying this idea, and this is an idea that gender is a state of mind, not a state of being.
Right.
I mean, it's moved from physiology to metaphysics, that you can think you're female and be female. You can think. I mean, and look, it's not just gender. We've already had cases where some white people thought came up with this idea that they were black, and so they've served in high position in African American associations, and they're white, And it's we're in la la land now, and so we've got to. I just reject the whole premise of this idea. I think the premises are fallacious. It's just not true that what you think is who you are.
The head of the state LGBT community spoke recently at ECU, and she said that she was transgender, or she's transsexual should be the proper term there. She was and she said that in 20 years I've never had this issue. I mean, nobody's ever questioned it. Well, she obviously looks female and she's had the surgical transition, so nobody is going to question that. To me, the problem here is I don't think the word transgender existed 10 years ago.
No,
you were either transgender in that you were transsexual. You actually were having the surgery. You're in that process. You're in that transition from one sex to another physically.
You
having
were
the
changing
surgery.
your physical nature.
Yeah,
right. Exactly.
Either that, or you're a transvestite, where you just dressed as the other, as the other sex. And now we've made it transgender to be inclusive within that community of all of those things. To me, that's just Halloween. That's just dressing up. And that's not the same.
We used to use a term called gender confusion to talk about these things, when people got confused about what gender they were. And someone in the letters to the editor on that article, recommended that it just be a biological test, not a gender test.
There's a couple of states have already passed that law.
Is that right?
If this is how you were born,
it's how your chromosomes line up.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And that's where you go.
So you have to have a blood test to prove your it's crazy.
I think they do that. It's on your birth certificate. I'm almost certain.
Yeah, it is.
That your birth certificate says you are a male or you are a female, right?
So I don't know about the new ones now. It does on mine. I'm not sure about
the third or fourth box.
The
challenge is
we could see that being challenged.
Yes,
but this isn't. Here it is again. It's another rights issue. Who actually has the rights here? Does this transgendered, confused, feelings-oriented person, do they have the rights, or does my daughter have the rights to not have a naked man walk in on her in the bathroom?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And that's. This is just me thinking here. 1 year of law school didn't do much for me, but I will tell you that in a fight, I would want her rights to supersede the rights of a naked man walking. I just don't think that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
This is another example of we're giving more rights to some very small minority group at the expense of the majority of Americans.
The majority.
Well, I think again, I'll go back. I think the language gets co-opted. Just like we've just for a long time co-opted the word gay, or we've co-opted the word love into meaning same thing as lust.
Right.
So we've had a lot of language issues here that become then part of the argument, part of words that matter in determining who has rights.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, as Christians looking at this issue, we have sympathy for these people that are confused about their gender, about what and in many cases they're convinced they're trapped in the wrong body and all of that. I mean, there's empathy for that situation, and there's therapy available for them. We should make sure there's counseling and opportunities for them. But I'm with you on this one, Doc. I think the rights of the majority in this case for sure has to supersede.
And in the meantime, do what your kindergarten teacher told you to do. Walk into the door where all the other people look like you.
Yeah.
If you're dressed like a boy, please go to the boys' room. If you're dressed like a girl, go to the girls' room. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, well then, yes, but what if you just dress up like a girl? See, that's part of the issue.
That's it.
Here.
Right.
From
what it appears, this guy was clearly
guy wasn't even
self-identified, wearing his board shorts.
Yeah.
He wasn't in a bikini.
He wasn't trying.
Yeah, he was.
But see, that's the problem with codifying it, though, is that there's no mechanism.
Right.
As they said, we don't have any policy here. So how do we know? How do we know that this isn't his true understanding of who his self is?
Right.
How do we know that?
Well, all you
don't
can do
know
then
that. You
is
can't
leave
know
it up to that individual.
Yeah. So now we start making it part of the law of the land is that people determine their what is right. People are self-determining what is right
we gotta go
for
back
them.
to the Wild West. Look, guy walks in on a bunch of girls in swimsuits. They should beat the living tar out of him. That should do it. That should be the way it's done. Forget the laws. Let's not codify anything. Let's just duke it out. What do you think, Robert?
Well, then you have to charge in there and do it.
No, I think we need to have. We're going to obviously what's going to happen. We're going to have gender police in there, so that are just going to take them into a little bay and check them out.
Like the guys that used to hand you the towel.
Yeah, exactly.
And the mint when you left.
You can stay. You go.
Yeah.
Next door down.
Yeah, it's we're laughing at this, but it is so pathetic.
It is.
It is so unbelievable and such a sign. Again, I mean, I always hate to be the bearer of this particular message, but we have really, as a church, done a poor job of providing an adequate understanding of the universe, its creator, and its creation. I mean, it's just really, it is sad. These people are being left to make up their own minds about how things came to be, and more importantly,
that's right.
how they came to be and who they are.
Yeah. No authority.
More to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station.